The city never truly sleeps. Beneath a curtain of rain and neon light, downtown pulses with its usual restless energy. Taxis splashing through flooded gutters. Strangers rushing past one another without a second glance. And then there is Vivian, stepping out of Mercy General Hospital after a grueling 12-hour shift. She pulls her coat tighter and exhales slowly, watching her breath disappear into the cold night air. She is not the kind of woman who goes unnoticed, not because she demands attention, but because she carries herself like someone who has earned every single step she takes. Warm, unshakable, completely herself. She smiles at the security guard, waves goodbye to a colleague, and turns toward the rain-soaked streets she knows by heart. She has walked this route 100 times before. Tonight, that walk is about to change everything. Vivian pulled her coat tighter as she turned into the narrow alley, rain tapping steadily against the pavement. This shortcut had saved her 20 minutes every night for 3 years. Tonight felt different, though. The usual hum of the city seemed muffled, distant. She slowed her steps instinctively. Then she saw him, a man slumped against the brick wall, one hand pressed weakly against his side, dark stains spreading through his shirt. Warning signs fired through her mind all at once. Abandoned alley, late hour, no witnesses. Every rational thought told her to back away and call for help from a safe distance. But Vivian was not built that way. Before the thought fully formed, her medical bag was already swinging off her shoulder, and her knees were hitting the wet ground beside him. Her voice came out steady and certain. "Hey, stay with me. I have got you." Vivian's eyes adjusted to the dim alley light, and her breath caught in her throat. The man slumped before her was Marco Reyes, even bleeding and barely conscious. There was something unmistakable about him. She had seen his face on news broadcasts, whispered about in hospital corridors. The most dangerous man in the city. But right now, he was just a man fighting to stay alive. She pushed every instinct of fear aside and snapped into nurse mode. Her medical bag was already open. The gunshot wound was deep, dangerously close to his side. She pressed her folded scarf firmly against the wound, applying steady pressure. "Stay with me," she said firmly, tapping his face. "Open your eyes. What is your name?" Marco's lips barely moved. "Keep talking," Vivian ordered, her voice calm but commanding. "You do not get to give up tonight." Marco's eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. His grip came fast, iron fingers locking around Vivian's wrist before she could react. His voice was low, rough, and dangerous despite the weakness behind it. "Don't," he rasped. "Don't call anyone. Not the police. Not anyone. You do, and you will regret it." Vivian did not flinch. She did not pull away. She simply looked at him, steady and unbothered, the way someone looks when fear has already been weighed and set aside. "I am not calling anyone," she said firmly. "I am trying to keep you alive. That wound is serious, and you have already lost a significant amount of blood." She held his gaze without blinking. "You can threaten me all you want, but right now, the only thing standing between you and bleeding out in this alley is me, so you are going to have to trust me." Marco stared at her. Nobody spoke to him like that. Nobody. Vivian's mind raced as she weighed her options. Taking Marco to the hospital meant a mandatory gunshot wound report, which would bring police, questions, and worse, dangerous people looking for him. She could not let that happen. She made her decision fast. Getting him upright was its own battle. Marco was heavy, barely cooperative, and every movement made him wince. Vivian wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pushed forward with everything she had. When a cab finally pulled over, she kept her voice steady and her face calm. She told the driver her friend had taken a bad fall and needed rest, not a hospital. The driver glanced back once, then pulled into traffic without another word. Vivian exhaled slowly. Her hand pressed firmly against Marco's side, keeping pressure on the wound. She had bought them time. Now she just needed to get him safe. Inside her small but warm apartment, Vivian laid Marco carefully onto her couch and immediately got to work. She moved with practiced efficiency, gathering clean towels, antiseptic, and her medical supplies without a single wasted motion. Marco watched her through heavy eyes, saying nothing at first. Every time her hands touched his wound, he flinched slightly, not from pain alone, but from something unfamiliar. Someone was taking care of him, and there was nothing behind it. No deal, no favor, no angle, just steady hands and quiet focus. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "You do this for strangers often?" Vivian did not look up. "Only the ones bleeding in alleys." A faint, almost invisible shift crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but something close. By the time she finished dressing the wound, small fragments of conversation had begun filling the silence between them, fragile but real. Morning light crept through the curtains, soft and unhurried. Marco's eyes opened slowly, the dull ache in his side grounding him back to reality. Then he saw her. Vivian, still in her scrubs, head tilted to one side, fast asleep in the chair beside him. She had never even made it to her own bed. Something unfamiliar moved through his chest. He looked away before it could settle. His phone buzzed violently against the nightstand, then again and again. 17 missed calls. Dante. His crew had been tearing the city apart all night. Marco carefully sat up, wincing, and stepped toward the window before answering. "I am fine," he said quietly. "Minor situation. I am handling it." "Boss, where are you? We need a location." Marco glanced back at Vivian sleeping peacefully. "East side, near the waterfront. I will reach out soon. Stand down." He hung up before Dante could push further. He had not lied in years. Somehow, protecting her felt more instinctive than breathing. Vivian stirred awake, her neck stiff from the chair. Across the small kitchen table, Marco sat with a coffee mug wrapped in both hands, watching her with those unreadable dark eyes. She moved quietly, pulling together what little she had in her refrigerator. Eggs, toast, orange juice. Simple. Nothing was said for several minutes. Then Marco broke the silence. "Why did you help me?" Vivian set a plate in front of him without drama, without hesitation. "Because I could not walk past someone dying in an alley. That is not something I am capable of doing. No agenda, no expectation, just the plain, honest truth." Marco looked down at his plate. Something moved behind his eyes, something unfamiliar and uncomfortable. He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who only gave when they expected to receive. He said nothing more, but the cold wall around him cracked, just slightly, in a way even he could not fully explain. Marco stepped outside the apartment building, the morning air sharp against his face. Dante and 3 other men stood waiting near the black SUVs, their expressions tight with unspoken questions. Marco approached calmly, keeping the building door firmly closed behind him. He pulled Dante aside, lowering his voice to something steady and absolute. "The woman inside. You do not know her name. You do not run her information. You do not speak about her to anyone inside or outside this organization." Dante studied him carefully. "And her safety? Handled quietly. Rotate 2 men on this block around the clock. She cannot know they are there." Dante gave a slow nod, reading something in Marco's expression he had never quite seen before. It was not obligation. It was not strategy. Marco glanced briefly back at the building before turning toward the waiting car. Whatever this was, it had already moved well beyond gratitude. Days slipped by, but Marco could not bring himself to fully disappear from Vivian's life. Still recovering, he found quiet excuses to remain close. He arranged for fresh flowers to arrive at her door, unsigned, no card attached. Groceries appeared on her doorstep before she even realized she needed them. His men rotated shifts outside her building, invisible but ever present, watching every entrance and exit without her knowledge. Vivian noticed. She was far too sharp not to. A bouquet of white lilies on a Tuesday. Bags of fresh produce she never ordered. A strange sense of being watched, yet somehow feeling safer than usual. She asked her neighbors. She checked with her building manager. Nobody had answers. And somewhere between puzzling over the mystery gifts and her long hospital shifts, she caught herself thinking about him, the wounded stranger with dangerous eyes and an unexpectedly gentle grip, more than she ever expected. The restaurant Marco chose sat conveniently half a block from Vivian's hospital. Coincidental, sure, when Vivian walked through the door after her shift and spotted him sitting there, looking effortlessly composed. Something between amusement and suspicion crossed her face. She knew immediately this was no accident, but she sat down anyway. "Fancy running into you here," Marco said smoothly. Vivian tilted her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "Mm-hmm." She let him have his moment. She could see right through every carefully constructed detail of his setup. And honestly, it was almost charming how hard he had tried. What surprised her was what came after. Once the pretense settled, something real emerged between them. They talked, genuinely, for the first time, about small things, then bigger ones. By the time dessert arrived, neither of them was performing anymore. Something quiet and undeniable had taken root, and neither quite knew what to do with it. The restaurant had grown quieter around them, but neither seemed to notice. Marco swirled his glass slowly, choosing his words the way a man chooses steps across uncertain ground. "My world," he said carefully, "is not one most people survive getting close to." Vivian studied him. There was danger in his eyes, yes, but underneath it, something exhausted, something human. "I believe you," she said quietly. Then she surprised him. "You know what it is like to be looked through? My whole career, people see my size before they see my skills. I have had to fight twice as hard just to be taken seriously." Marco set his glass down. He was not performing attention. He was genuinely still. "They underestimated you," he said. "Every single day." Something shifted across his face. Not pity, recognition. In his world, strength wore armor. But hers was different. Hers was built from surviving being invisible, and he found that more powerful than anything he had ever commanded. Word travels fast in the criminal underworld, and not always in ways Marco can control. One of his most dangerous rivals, a man named Silvano, had been quietly piecing together the events of that rainy night. Someone had helped Marco survive. A woman. That single detail was enough for Silvano to smell opportunity. He wanted leverage, and a mystery woman connected to Marco Reyes was exactly that. His people began pulling threads, asking questions in the right dark corners of the city. When Dante brought Marco the news, something rare happened. Marco's composure, that iron stillness he wore like armor, fractured. His jaw tightened. His eyes went cold in a different way, not calculating, but afraid. Not for himself, for Vivian, a woman who owed him nothing had given him everything, and now she was being pulled into a world she never asked to enter. He would not allow it. Whatever it took, she would be protected. Marco stood in Vivian's doorway, his usual commanding presence stripped down to something raw and unsteady. He told her everything, the crime family, the rivals, the danger now circling her life because of one act of kindness in a rain-soaked alley. He braced himself for fear, for the door slamming in his face. What he got was something far more powerful. Vivian's eyes darkened, not with terror, but with fury. She stepped closer, her voice low and controlled, which somehow made it cut deeper than shouting ever could. "You sat at my table, you slept under my roof. I dressed your wound with my own hands," she said, "and the entire time, you let me trust a version of you that was not even real." Marco opened his mouth. She held up one hand, stopping him cold. "The danger does not scare me, Marco. The lie does." Vivian's voice cuts through the apartment like steel. She is not shouting, but every word lands with the weight of someone who has spent a lifetime refusing to be dismissed. She tells Marco she is not fragile. She is not someone who needs to be handled carefully, fed half-truths, and shielded from reality like she might shatter. She trusted him inside her home, inside her space, and he repaid that with silence and secrets. Marco stands there, and something extraordinary happens. The man who commands entire rooms with a single glance has absolutely nothing to say. The silence stretches between them, raw and exposed. Then slowly, something shifts. His voice drops low. He admits he was afraid, not of his enemies, but of her seeing him clearly and still choosing to walk away. Vivian's anger softens just enough. She admits quietly that she has feelings for him too, and that terrifies her completely. The safe house was tucked away from the noise of the city, simple and quiet in a way neither of them was used to. Marco had arranged everything under the banner of security, but somewhere between the second morning and the third evening, the pretense faded. They were just two people sharing space, sharing meals, sharing moments. Vivian had a way of filling silence with warmth rather than words, and Marco found himself leaning into it without realizing. She cracked a joke about his inability to make tea properly, and he laughed, genuinely and fully, in a way that surprised even him. He could not remember the last time that had happened. And when Marco sat across from her one evening and told her she was remarkable, not as flattery but as fact, Vivian felt something settle deep inside her chest, something she had quietly waited her whole life to feel. It happened fast. Too fast. Vivian had barely stepped outside when two men closed in from opposite sides, their intentions unmistakable. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Then Marco's men appeared from nowhere, moving with swift and silent precision, cutting off every angle before a single hand could reach her. By the time Marco's car screeched to a stop at the curb, it was over. He crossed the distance between them in seconds, his eyes scanning her from head to toe, searching for any sign of harm. The composed, untouchable man the entire city feared was nowhere to be found in that moment. What stood before Vivian was something raw, something real. He pulled her into his arms without a single word, and she felt his hands trembling slightly against her back. Marco Reyes, the man who bowed to nothing, held her like she was everything he had never allowed himself to want. And for the first time, he did not pull away. The room was still. No sirens, no footsteps, no threat. Just the two of them and the weight of everything unsaid. Marco looked at Vivian, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. He told her that in all his years running his world, commanding rooms and making men fear his name, he had never once wanted to leave it all behind. Until now. Vivian felt the truth of his words land somewhere deep, but she held her ground. She told him she meant every word she said. She could not love someone whose choices put innocent lives in danger, including her own. She had spent her whole life protecting people. She refused to spend it fearing for herself. Marco nodded slowly. No argument, no manipulation, just silence, and the painful honesty of two people standing at a crossroads, finally seeing exactly what was at stake. 3 days passed with no word from Marco. Then came a knock at Vivian's door, soft and uncertain, nothing like the man she thought she knew. She opened it to find him standing alone. No guards flanking the hallway, no expensive suit demanding authority. Just Marco, hands at his sides, looking like the bleeding stranger she had knelt beside in the rain. He spoke quietly. He told her that before that night, he had forgotten what it felt like to be a person rather than a position. He told her she had not just stopped the bleeding. She had reminded him that something worth saving still existed inside him. He asked for a chance. Not a favor, not a transaction, just a chance to become someone deserving of the woman who chose compassion over fear. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. She stepped aside and let him in. The city hums softly outside their window as Marco and Vivian sit together. No guards, no secrets, just two people choosing each other in the most honest way they know how. Marco has begun the long and difficult process of restructuring his empire, meeting with lawyers, stepping back from the shadows, and building something he would not be ashamed for Vivian to see. It is not a clean road. It is not a fast one. But for the first time, it is his choice. Vivian does not stand beside him as someone who rescued him or reformed him. She stands there as someone whose courage reminded him that better was possible. Their love was not born in candlelight or grand gestures. It was born in a rain-soaked alley, in a moment of pure human kindness. And somehow that made it the most unbreakable foundation of all.